Greetings and salutations, young true believers. Alright, so today we are talking about the empiricist philosophers. The empiricist philosophers are a group of philosophers who believe, this should be mentioned right off the bat. These labels, empiricist, rationalist, etc., these are not terms that, Descartes didn't consider himself a rationalist philosopher, right? Leibniz and Spinoza didn't consider themselves rationalist philosophers. Hume, Berkeley, Locke never called themselves empiricists. So these terms were invented in the 19th century by academics to kind of lump them all together based on the character, the similarities that their views had. But nevertheless, it works for our purposes, right? So what loosely binds Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Hobbes, etc. together is the fact that they think that all of our knowledge comes to us through our senses. That is to say, knowledge is a posteriori, after experience, instead of a priori, prior to experience, or innate knowledge, as Descartes would have it. All right, so Locke, we'll start with John Locke, and on page 170 of your text, right, the editor of our text, Great Philosophical Arguments, Lewis Vaughan, he writes, like a good empiricist, Locke believes that we are all directly aware of, all that we are directly aware of is sense data, the content of our experience. Our sense experience is caused by external objects, and we can have knowledge of those objects because our sense data resemble or represent them to an extent, right? John Locke is not what we would today call a representationalist, someone who believes that our senses accurately reflect the external reality, right? Whatever is out there in the world, right? As a matter of fact, you'd be really hard pressed to find anyone in philosophy who actually holds that view. But nevertheless, but Locke insists that not all of our sense experience faithfully reflects reality. He distinguishes between two kinds of properties that external objects can have. Primary qualities are objective properties such as size, solidity, and mobility. They are immaterial objects, independent of our senses, and would be possessed by the objects even if there were no minds around to perceive them. Secondary qualities are such properties as red and the smell of roses, and the taste of sugar, for example, right? They are in the mind in that they depend on the operation of the senses. They exist only when someone experiences them. For Locke, we can have objective knowledge of material objects because some of our sense data represent the object's primary qualities, which are objective characteristics of them. So this view, it's known as the primary-secondary quality distinction. It is not original to Locke. As a matter of fact, in the 17th century, Galileo, early in the 17th century, was espousing this exact same view. So what's going on? Well, Locke and Galileo are arguing that there are certain qualities about the world that are dependent on, for their existence, on the existence of minds to perceive them. Color, taste, smell, right? All of these properties, and philosophers use the word properties, qualities, attributes interchangeably. So if you ever see them, just know they all mean the same thing. These things depend on living creatures with minds and sensory apparatuses set up like a dog or a human or an ape or something like that, right, to perceive them. And if there were no creatures anywhere in the universe like us, then there wouldn't be any such thing as color, smell, taste, right? The primary qualities, however, by contrast, and as Locke mentions them, size, solidity, mobility, figure, etc., right? These are actually in the object. Even if there were no minds to perceive them, they would be there. Now, fast forward to the second big figure in our empiricist trilogy, the Irish clergyman, philosopher, George Berkeley, who incidentally, the city of Berkeley and the University of California, Berkeley are named after, right? He argues that the primary quality distinction is much ado about nothing. And, well, you need to know this. You should know this anyway, even though Vaughan doesn't talk about it. The reason Berkeley is so down on this view is because it requires the positing of something called substance. So the Greek word is visa, the Latin word is substantia. We see where the English word comes from. It comes from the Latin word. What is it? Well, Aristotle argued that underneath the world of appearances, there was a greater, more substantial, it's the best I could do, reality, a reality that just exists more fundamentally. He called this substance. Substance is indetectable through your senses. You can't smell it, taste it, hear it, etc. You have to infer that it's there, right? And it underlies all those appearances. And when all those appearances fade away, right, there's still the enduring substance, right? Berkeley argues that substance is the cause of much philosophical confusion. For Berkeley, there are only three things you need to understand the world. You need God, you need ideas, and you need minds, right? Minds pick up on ideas, but minds don't generate ideas. You need God's perfect and all-powerful mind to generate ideas, right? And when you get rid of this idea of substance, the primary quality distinction on Berkeley's view collapses. It's gone, right? Well, enter into this debate our third figure, David Hume. And Lewis Vaughan repeats a mistake in the text on page 169. He writes, quote, Hume probably has been most influential of all three of the great empiricist philosophers, arguing for an uncompromising empiricism that leads to skepticism, a far-reaching skepticism that not all empiricists have shared. Okay, so a skeptic is ostensibly someone who argues that human beings can have no knowledge at all. That's not David Hume, right? Rather, Hume argues that substance might be there. It might not. I can't know. There might be an external world. There might not be. What am I going to do? Right? Well, this is where Hume's great adage, amidst all your philosophy, be still a man, comes into play, right? Be still a human being. What he means is that we are finite creatures with finite powers, right? We can never be certain of anything beyond our immediate sensory perceptions, right? So what do? We go with it, right? So we have lives to lead. We have to do the best we can with with the limited sensory powers we have, the limited cognitive capacity we have, right? So what Hume is, properly speaking, is the first pragmatist philosopher. I'm going to talk about pragmatism with you tomorrow, but Hume is the first pragmatist philosopher. And to really illustrate what a pragmatist view is about really quickly, I want to talk about a problem that Locke presents. When a person leaves a room and you're no longer sensorily perceiving them, how do you know that they continue to exist? You don't, because you're not detecting them through your senses. Now, it's a safe bet that they continue to exist, but that's not certainty, right? Well, for a pragmatist, right, they would ask what that belief in the continued existence of the person does for you. What's its cash value, right? And that's what Hume's about. For Hume, you have immediate sense impressions. These fade and are replaced by what he calls ideas, right? And ideas are the faded copies of impressions. And that's what all our knowledge is built upon. Now, we can extrapolate a bit from our immediate sensory perceptions, but not much, right? Hume's notorious for blowing up a couple of other cherished philosophical icon or canonical beliefs. Like, for example, Hume points out that cause and effect, strictly speaking, is just a mental habit among human beings, right? You see a ball fall to the ground, right? Somebody threw a ball up in the air and it hits the ground. What actually happens is there's event 1, somebody tosses it in the air, and then there's event B, it falls to the ground, and your brain fills in the gap between event A and B so that it's fluid and continuous. But in fact, they're two separate events. That's what all cause and effect is. Hume also points out that inductive reasoning, the conclusion of an inductive argument, is never proven or demonstrated. It is only more or less probable, right? Hume points out that in the final analysis, inductive reasoning is not rationally justified. So his classic example is premise 1, the sun rose today. conclusion, therefore, to some will rise tomorrow. But as Hume points out, in every single inductive argument, there's an enthymeme, or a hidden, that is to say, a hidden or suppressed premise. And it's always the same hidden or suppressed premise, namely, the future will resemble the past. But that's not something human beings can know. The most you can say is that it's likely that the future will resemble the past. So Hume pushes empiricism as far as it can go, and when you push empiricism as far as it can go, you wind up with pragmatism. That's what we'll talk about tomorrow.